Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Psychedelics Today here. Just Kyle and Joe today. Today on the show, we're going to do something new we haven't had for a little while. Before we do that, though, just a reminder, September 23, our next cohort kicks off for Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. These are both the, 2 and 5, noon and 5 my time, so 2 and 7 U.S. Eastern time. So there's support for people in, all of North America and Europe. We've also had Australians join. We're hoping to launch some more Australia dates soon, so stay tuned for that. And it's an 8-week program, CE approved by the American Psychological Association for 12 hours out of the 47
12
total.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's largely the contact time that you're in class with us that we're counting there. So you got to come to those. So make sure you can make those dates. Make sure the credits are applicable to your license. In the state of California, it works for psychologists, nurses, and therapists, I believe. And from what we understand, it is highly portable given it's the state of California. So
and
check
APA
it out.
Approved.
And APA approved, right? So we've had, I think, doctors use it a little bit, NPs, PAs use it. So it's a pretty cool thing. One of my favorite things I do is teach this class. We're getting really excited developing more classes that are in the background that we haven't even been able to share about yet. But this course is great if you want to be fluent and conversational in the psychedelic space and be able to, communicate effectively your thoughts in this, because it's a really weird class of compounds and plants that we don't, even supposed experts don't really fully understand it yet. So let's get you up to speed, and then you can probably pick which kind of program you want to go into from here. It's a really great foundations course, and only 8 weeks, 47 hours total if you join the live supported one. So we would love to have you. You can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com or psychedelicstoday.com. Cool. If you want to support us, small monthly donations, patreon.com/psychedelics today. As low as $2 a month helps us a lot. So please consider helping us there. And I think that's it for right now. So maybe we'll mention a couple things on the end. But today on this episode, Kyle, we kind of wanted to talk about who we are, what we do, why we do it, things like that. We did ages ago these episodes like about Joe, about Kyle, where we kind of interviewed each other, trying to tell each other's story a little bit. And
some of our first episodes
years ago.
I was still living in Burlington. I remember where I filmed that first. I was house sitting and I was in a different location when we filmed my episode.
Yeah. So really what we want to do is just let you know who we are while we're doing it. What our motivations are, all that kind of fun stuff. Why did we get started, Kyle? We wanted to make a place to help restore what we saw as the rightful place, and still see, of Dr. Stanislav Grof and holotropic breathwork in the psychedelic scene in general. I think we had some other kind of, ancillary things, but that was largely it, right?
Yeah. We originally got connected through Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson, our breathwork teachers. And I remember some of our first conversations when we started talking was, I was kind of part of Burlington College, which now has closed.
Well, you did your undergrad there.
I did my undergrad
you were part
there.
Of it.
Yeah. But I guess, I was kind of like in conversation with the new advisor over there, and we were trying to put together this master's in transpersonal psychology with an emphasis in getting breathwork training, and then also having a psychedelic studies. I remember he had the pamphlets all drafted up, and it was like a self-study master's in transpersonal psychology, psychedelic studies, breathwork. And it was really exciting. And I think that was our first conversation. It was like, should we do this? And I think Lenny was trying to maybe convince you to do that. And we just had a huge conversation about grad school. But yeah, and then it shifted to, we had all this archived material from our teachers, Lenny and Elizabeth, that we wanted to kind of just preserve and kind of keep their work going. And then that slowly shifted into, we've been to a few psychedelic conferences, and, most of it was just very heavy on the research that was really emerging. And I didn't hear too much about Stan's work or breath work. And I remember just having conversations with people at these conferences about breath work, and it just seemed like so new to people that they didn't really know too much about it. I think now it's becoming more popular, but back in like 2010, 2011, 12, like it was still, people knew about it, but I don't think as much as it is now. But yeah, we really wanted to, weave Stan's work and breath work back into like this psychedelic renaissance and conversation, and just really highlights the importance of it.
Right. And worth noting, Michael and Annie Mithofer used to do a lot of work with Lenny and Elizabeth in Vermont. They were friends back then. I think they still are. And the Groff training was substantial back then. It was for a while the only show in town related to kind of psychedelic training, and we call it breathwork training, but it's run by the guy who has done more LSD psychotherapy than anybody on the planet with clients. And what does that mean? So food for thought for folks out there. And a thought I just had now, Kyle, is we were seeing a lot of conversation around IFS from Michael and Annie, but we didn't really see, and even Rick Doblin was an early student of Stan, and we see barely any conversation around Stan's work, probably because it's still not very accepted. It's kind of like a dirty word, like saying things about Freudian theory in a lot of areas, right? Like many psychology professors don't even care to talk about depth work whatsoever. They're like, well, that's not how it works. It's like, well, from your perspective, sure. And obviously the Freudian method has a lot of flaws, but I don't think that's enough to throw the whole thing out.
Yeah.
How about what is true here and what can we build on it? And Freud or Groff is an extension on the three. Like he's the third pillar in a way of
that's what Lenny always
Freud,
says.
Jung, Groff.
Yep.
I agree that he's going to be remembered as one of the greats in the depth traditions. But TBD on how soon that'll be, right? Because we have to get a little downstream on the transpersonal topic.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a good place to go ahead. You first.
I was going to say, I guess to give credit to MAPS, in the MAPS training, they do talk about Stan's work, that whole concept of the inner healing intelligence, inner radar, to focus on that approach. And since Michael and Annie are breathwork trained, they obviously were bringing that part into the MDMA training. And Rick, right? I mean, he was trained in holotropic breathwork, and they were using that as a technique to offer people experiences when they, aren't allowed to give MDMA out. So, they are using that as a training modality, right? To be able to allow people to have those experiences, offer that sitting experience for people in holotropic states. So, but I guess, our point was like, it didn't
it's
feel,
not public.
I guess.
They don't lead with it. It's inside the training, right?
Yeah.
Versus like, oh, let's talk about Stan, who has the most experience. In a clinical capacity. But yeah, like your point's well taken. And I feel like I'm a little hard on stuff like this too, kind of a little too regularly, but the point is the public discourse wasn't really there whatsoever. Why would imperial science and brain imaging get so much press, but Stan gets zero?
Right.
Continue to get zero. I'm into it. Like I want science to keep going, but to what end and why are we doing it? And like, do we not have enough results from psychedelic psychotherapy to show that it's just worth doing? Do we need an explanation? I suppose regulators like that.
Yeah.
So that's important on that front. But yeah. That's the intention. That's why we got started. Yeah. I just resisted grad school, right? I'm living in a expensive state in an expensive town, and I had a nice software job at the time. So like, why would I drop out to be going to debt? That's kind of my line. So, and I think I recall trying to talk you out of going to grad school.
I think you have multiple times, but
I'm glad you did it now.
I think I already started grad school once we started this project. Yeah, that was back in 2016, which I'm guessing then we touched base probably in 2015 at that point then, because I didn't, yeah. because we were having those conversations before I started grad school, and we started Psychedelics Today.
It could have even been as early as 13, 14 too, because I was living in like a 400 square foot apartment with no sink. I recall that. I think that's where I had our first call. So lived there for less than a year. Beautiful place. Yeah. Washing dishes in the shower. What a thrill. glad I'm done with that. Yeah. So that's our source, right? Like you and I spent a lot of time there. People, if you want like more detail on our backstory, like the About Joe, About Kyle episodes, you can find on the About Us page on the website. So psychedelicstoday.com/about. And the links to the episodes are right there. And you know, what eventually happened over time is people wanted education. We had this idea, like, what if we could share with people what we know now that would be helpful to somebody in high school or college, or, you know, trying to figure out their way around this really weird topic. And that's what we did. We developed that first Navigating Psychedelics, and it was awesome. Still love it. And, we still use a lot of that content from years ago. And, you know, what things from festival harm reduction to like, hey, you should probably take a break, to all sorts of stuff there, right?
Yeah, and tons of great interviews. I think that's the gold there. But yeah, right. I mean, I think we saw that need, right? As we started to grow here at Psychedelics Today, doing the podcast. You know, I remember the conversation around integration started to really take hold. I mean, that was a conversation we've always had in breathwork. And, you know, it's something I've been exploring, you know, pretty much my whole life since my near-death experience. Like, what does it mean to walk in this world after a very profound experience? And how do you make sense of that? And I always go back to something one of my teachers, Michael Watson, told me. I shared my story with him, and he said, you know, if you grew up in a traditional culture, the elders would have stepped in and taught you this new way of being in the world, this new way of seeing. They would have taught you the tools and give you advice and guidance. But, you know, unfortunately, you had to figure it out on your own. And, you know, that was it was like one of the first times I felt like heard and witnessed really grappling with how profound, you know, the near-death experience was. So, you know, yeah, this concept of integration has definitely been part of my life. And I think around 2016, I started volunteering for MAPS too. And I was helping to manage the integration list, and we were having lots of conversations around it. But there wasn't too many great resources, right? So that, I think our idea was like, hey, this is a really important topic. Nobody's really talking about it that much. It's not out in the public. How can we, you know, just help to educate people around this concept of integration, harm reduction, really maximizing, you know, your experience with the substance, so you don't have to keep going back in all the time. How do you, you know, start to bring that into your life? And so, yeah, that was really fun to kind of take that deep dive and create that course. I think, you know, part of it too is, you know, I definitely have been interested in teaching for a while. I ended up creating a capstone project at Burlington College called what was it called? The Stanislav Grof's Psychology of Extraordinary Experiences.
Nailed it. Yep.
Yeah. It was a 16-week course for college credit. And yeah, it was really fun. Co-taught it with Lenny and Elizabeth, and had Stan Skype in for Q&A, which was really awesome. And part of that course was the students went down to do a weekend holotropic breathwork. So they had the theoretical, and then they had the experiential, and then the integration. So yeah, I think we already kind of had like a brief little outline of, you know, here's a course that we could, you know, kind of, you know, replicate to some degree, and teach what integration is and the importance of it. That feels like so long ago. What was that, 2017, probably?
Might have even been earlier, man. Yeah. So this idea of Grof and transpersonal psychology is confusing. Do you have a helpful definition, since your undergrad was transpersonal psych, or what are some of your definitions for transpersonal psych that you like to use? Maybe that's a better way to put it.
I always like to just go back to the the etymology of it. Transpersonal just meaning beyond the self. So transpersonal psychology really looking at exceptional experiences and trying to scientifically look at that. What's going on there? So an example of transpersonal phenomenon, past life experiences, near death experiences, dreams, psychedelics, meditation. So really exploring these extraordinary experiences where we have a hard time grappling with it, trying to make sense of it. How do we understand these states of consciousness, and how do we bring them into our life? How do we I guess also think about them as healing too, right? I always kind of go then back to Stan Grof's holotropic, right? This movement towards wholeness, and a lot of these transpersonal experiences offer us an ability to move towards wholeness. Maybe it helps us to step outside of ourselves and go, oh, there might be another way. So,
and occasionally things just spontaneously get better.
yeah.
You rest and you make the right conditions, and things can get better. And perhaps it's helpful to even just back up a little bit more. So Abraham Maslow developed this whole framework with a number of other people, eventually called humanistic psychology. And he eventually saw limitations because it wasn't really able to include the full range of experiences that humans can have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Grof, Fadiman, Anthony Studich, is that right?
I always mispronounce his name, but yeah.
They got together and developed transpersonal psychology. And Sutich, yeah. I think he was Swiss, right? We need to do a piece on Tony Sutich. It's kind of crazy that I don't know anything about him really. And all the photos of him that I've seen is he's in a hospital bed, taking a phone call. Good Lord. So we clearly need to know who this is. And anyway, they got together and they said, okay, what can we do about all these extraordinary psychedelic states, spiritual states from prayer or meditation or yoga? How do we include this stuff? And they had to create a whole new vision, the transpersonal vision, and figure out how do we include past lives and experiences of other people, or the experience of being an animal. There you go. Beyond the person, right? Beyond the personal biography. And then Stan's major contribution, we've talked about it a ton, is expanding the cartography of the psyche and developing his birth perinatal matrices, which are, we know that concept's a little old and a little outdated, but it's still really helpful. Mm-hmm. I think, a fun project for somebody, if they're interested, is developing that further, really getting to know the BPMs, the birth perinatal matrices, and this whole theory, and then talking to a lot of obstetricians and midwives to see what you can come up with, see if you can develop that further. But yeah, as a general rule, it's a really helpful framework. Frameworks don't, the map is not the territory, but, it's really, really helpful. We find it helpful when running breathwork sessions because we can maybe use certain kinds of phrasing or be more careful at times, depending on where they're at. And so that's Grof's contribution, the primary contribution to the field of psychology. And there's plenty more, but
yeah, they were originally going to call it transhumanistic psychology, and then
glad they didn't.
And then I think Grof ended up on the term transpersonal, which William James, I think, first coined that term, transpersonal.
Perfect. Right, and if we look back at James, James had all these great critiques about the way people were doing science, and this is really an extension of the work of William James, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your psychology does not include all possible states, then the science needs to be expanded or modified to include it. I just heard something today from a physician that they don't believe in chronic Lyme disease, and it's well, you can say that, right? But when you say that to somebody who might be suffering it, it totally excludes the possibility that it doesn't really totally exclude it, but shits on their lived experience. It makes
Yeah.
their lived experience less valid. And, you know, perhaps that's not the right framing when you talk to your clients. And, you know, perhaps it's not the best to reduce a mystical experience to what happened when you were a kid. Like, oh, okay, how does this relate to your relationship with your grandmother? You know, like that's ridiculous. But you don't know it's ridiculous until you've had a number of these experiences that it's, you know, that psyche is really strange, vast.
It is.
What we can access with our minds is quite stunning. And these are things that Kyle and I can say because we're not, you know, this is controversial. If you were a highly funded researcher, PhD, MD, whatever, you start saying stuff like transpersonal and past lives and, you know, what do these yogic mystical states have to do with the normal, you know, lived experience of a human?
I remember when I met Rick Strassman, it was at Cosm when Alex
Sweet.
and Allison Gray just moved up to their new spot up in upstate New York.
That's so pretty.
And yeah, it was back in 2010, and they were doing the screening of DMT, the Spirit Molecule movie, and I was just sharing with him. I'm really interested. I'm studying transpersonal psychology. I had this near-death experience. I'm just, you know, super fascinated. I told him about like my psilocybin experience that was on par with my near-death experience. I remember he just looked at me and said, you know, if you're interested in this, science doesn't want to hear it. Stick with physiology, you know, track heart rate, track blood pressure, like brain science. You know, science doesn't want to hear about these transpersonal mystical experiences. And I remember,
so disappointing.
I remember feeling like a bit like disappointed, being like, what? Like, this is what I'm so interested in because this is the stuff that baffles my mind and I want to learn more about it. So it was interesting to get that word of caution by him. But, you know, I think he also is stating that I think some of his experiences were a little bit traumatizing. I think I remember him saying on stage there that this was the first time he was like talking about his experience publicly within like 15 years of doing his research, just because
his
of
personal
like,
experience with DMT or his experience in the
no,
trial?
with the research, yeah, just because
Right.
of like how much it like challenged him
I've
as a
actually never
researcher.
heard about any of his personal experiences, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that shows like you're this well-respected researcher, physician, doing really cool, interesting research, and then your experience is no longer valid towards your peers. Like your peers don't want to hear about your experience. And what does that do? Like,
Yeah,
what
like how
kind
do you
of,
like talk about, hey, you know, the client or patient, participant met entities? The hell does that mean, right?
uh,
Like,
I hope you gave him a healthy injection of some sort of antipsychotic or benzo. Like
yeah,
that's kind of like, you know, it's hard to not feel a little demoralized when you hear things like that from Strassman, right? Like you did your whole undergrad in transpersonal and you wanted to do trans. In our experience, Kyle, like how many physicians, researchers really that we've talked to, have done hundreds of episodes now. How many really want to engage in this transpersonal topic? Like barely any. And I think
yeah.
our mission is still valid as a result
Like
of
there's
that.
definitely a few, and I'm always like
Totally.
super excited to connect with them. I'm like, oh yes, like this is exciting. Yeah, I recently just connected with a few people that are like really interested in this topic, and
Good.
I think as the research grows, and I think people have more exposure to the types of experiences that can unfold, I think it's just going to be natural that we need to adapt some of these frameworks and ways of thinking because, like, how do we help to make meaning out of these experiences when clients are coming back reporting some of this stuff, right? To them, it's deeply personal and real that they just relived a past life experience. And, you know, is that real? I mean, I guess this is where, like, coming back to Whitehead for me and just hearing Lenny talk, like, you know, it gives some sort of a framework. And Whitehead seems respectable in that sense that, you know, the entirety of the universe, all the past is possible. All potentiality is there, and
Accessible.
so accessible. Yeah, and so like, does that mean that during your psychedelic experience you were reliving your past life experience, or could you have been reliving an experience from the past of the universe that you're able to tap into. And that's been really helpful, just to even provide a different framework. And I don't know, for me, like, I've struggled with that. I've definitely had those experiences where I've had like these past life experiences and breathwork sessions and whatnot, where I felt so connected to that. And I was like, oh, maybe that's like my identity. Maybe is that. But also kind of bringing in that other kind of, I guess, like another framework and being like, well, maybe it was just an experience of something else that happened in the past. Do I need to be attached to it all the time? And I don't know, that also helped me kind of process it and like maybe feel less emotionally attached to it and be like, no, that is what happened. That's my identity. It just gave me a little sense of like, okay, like maybe I don't need to dwell on this as much. Like maybe it is part of me. Maybe it is that, but maybe it's also just me experiencing what happened in the past at some point. And
Right. The simplistic idea around reincarnation seems a little goofy. It's not like this. And I don't even like talking about it because it's such a goofy topic in terms of like the math not working. So like how many humans existed 200 years ago versus now? Like there's not enough souls, you know? So what is that conversation? Is it, you know, more Buddhist Hindu, or it's like different species or whatever, interstellar? Who knows?
You ever watch
Is
those
time linear?
documentaries
Like
about like
thanatology stuff and like reports around NDEs and
no,
past life?
like the monks that die and then reincarnate, and then as a child, like, you know, they figure out where he's going to reincarnate, and the child starts, you know, pointing out different you know, items that was part of their past life and being able to
Oh yeah, there's a
recall
whole
stuff.
vetting process in
Super
various traditions.
fascinating. Yeah.
Like even the Dalai Lama has that kind of situation.
Yeah. Yep.
You recall the Chinese government, the CCP, made it illegal for the Dalai Lama to reincarnate in China.
Jeez.
Yeah, cool stuff over there. And you know, like it's a somewhat valid set of questions to ask. How you go and ask empirical questions there is really difficult. But I think if you have enough somewhat verified anecdotes, you could figure out an approach there. I don't know what that approach is or what it'll yield for fruit, but you know, people have these experiences, and Xanax isn't necessarily helpful, or SSRIs aren't really helpful. Like Kyle, you had some pretty extreme experiences in your youth. Like, do you think psych meds would have like been a good idea? Like go on some SSRIs, SNRIs, and benzos to like, get you through
For me
to the end of your undergrad?
personally, yeah, no, for me personally, no. Like I felt like it was a process that I needed to ride out, and to work with. For me, it was like, yeah, this like kind of an initiatory thing of like, all right, going through this, I guess I just need to ride it out and see where it brings me to. But I had something like deep in my intuition telling me that, like, you know, I was able to function, right? It wasn't like, not being able to function. And if, you know, if that was the case, yeah, psych meds or some sort of like level of care would have been probably really helpful for me. But I'm pretty functional, even though I was being exposed to a lot of different transpersonal experiences spontaneously, not even with psychedelics, just, you know, dreams and stuff like that. For those that are listening, I just did an episode with Michael from Third Eye Drops, and you know, I shared a dream that I had. I might have actually shared it on the podcast, but you know, the dream was happening as an actual event was unfolding. And how the hell do I make sense of that? I have no idea. So you could go check that out if you want to listen to the dream a little bit more in detail. But yeah, how do we make sense of these experiences that, you know, just there's no scientific explanation for it?
Right.
How do we
And
validate that for people?
right, it's normal to have extreme states. Like it's okay and natural to have extreme states. And you know, the Graphian frame, I think, helps us support people through that process. And you know, that's my operating system, right? That's people come to us all the time with stories, and it's probably both of our shared foundations. You know, maybe we'll make some advice around certain specifics, but yeah, largely it's, you know, how can you slow down and process and be in community, and you know, all these kind of fairly safe things. And maybe you need to take 2 years off of psychedelics or more. Maybe you're done for life. Maybe you need to do them more often. Maybe breath work is enough. You know, there's a lot of questions, and not a really clear path forward. So this kind of weird postmodern existence we have, it makes it tough for moderns, I think, to make good decisions. Like, what type of meditation do I pick?
Right.
Should I pay 2,500 for TM or more? Should I pay $20 plus a month for Headspace, or what can I do to learn meditation for free? There's plenty of resources out there, folks. And then what ayahuasca center do I go to? What breathwork teacher do I pick? And all these things, or method even, right?
There's so much
or
out
tradition.
there.
Yeah, and it's mind-boggling, right? Insurance doesn't really cover much of this stuff. I think meditation's probably getting closer to being covered. And I think a lot of people at like a big employer with a good insurance company, they probably have free meditation instruction at this point, which is amazing, honestly. But what do we do with that? And, what is the future of humanity here? Like, the positive of the transpersonal vision is that we can solve all these things. Like, there is this really great case, a story that Stan shares in some of his books. Maybe it was When the Impossible Happens, but this retreat they did in Esalen with top US scientists and top Soviet scientists. And they did breath work. They had a lot of talks, and then they did breath work. And both parties, the Americans and the Soviets, like, saw each other a lot more clearly after that.
Wow.
And I think there was maybe a peyote ceremony he documented as well. And Stan was kind of scapegoated by some of the natives as being like the problem. There's like, from Soviet Prague, colonized by both Nazis and Soviets. Like, he's the problem. And it's like, eventually, after riding the process out, there's a great reconciliation at the end. So It's about this process, about trusting your own kind of biology, that your body is going to bring you through most of the time.
Yeah.
And especially if you have a really good trusting container, that people that kind of can help you, you're in pretty good shape. It's a tough process. It's a vague process, and it requires a lot of intuition and careful commentary, but it's a cool process. But like, can you contrast it to like your understanding of CBT or DBT? No. Like highly procedural versus like highly fluid.
They're so different, right? And I think that's like something. Well, again, I think this is coming back to something Lenny talked to us about, just about doing research on breath work, and just even thinking about like psychedelics in general, and psychedelic therapy. Do we highly like create these highly detailed protocols around the therapy, or do we understand the art of it, right? And leave space open for more of a process oriented approach, and understanding that there's a lot of nuance, that it's really hard to proceduralize some of this stuff.
Right. Like, let's look at breathwork training in the breathwork world real quick, in the holotropic and dream shadow threads. You can't really write a manual around this. It's really, really hard.
I mean, you could, right? You write a manual around technique, but there's also the art of it that comes in, that's more kind of intuitive, and it's always evolving and growing. But I think the thing is with protocols and procedures, that you get so fixated on that technique that it needs to go in a certain order all the time, or it needs to be done a certain way, versus more of that art approach where it's like more intuitive, it's relational, it's like what's coming up, and how do we work with it, instead of saying, no, it needs to fit in this certain box, and this is, we just need to check it off and make sure we go through this order.
Right. Yeah. And to me, it's obvious why people are uncomfortable with this stream. Everybody wants a certification and a training, and they would like for it to be less than 20 hours long. Right. And that's, maybe that's okay for CAP, but when you're doing like really, really intense, like tryptamine work or breath work, 20 hours is just barely enough. Like, no, wildly inadequate. Like the Groff Transpersonal Training Program, and I hope Dream Shadow, like, to be a holotropic breathwork facilitator takes at the very least 2 years. Was it 5 different week-long retreats plus a 2-week certifying retreat with the GTT group?
I think something like that.
Right. a couple core modules, some electives. I think I only did an elective with GTT, but all my other training has been with Dream Shadow. But what does it mean that to do breath work takes 2 years, but to do psychedelic work, you could theoretically get a certification in a week or two from various
a lot
groups.
of the breathwork is doing your own work too, right? It's not
over
necessarily
time.
like the technique and learning the technique. That's pretty simple. It's the actual doing your own work, which is most of the training. I think you can understand the theoretical aspects and again the technique, but even like I remember at one of the last bodywork module trainings, like Lenny always kept emphasizing do less, right? And everybody wants a certain technique on how do you do this, and it's like do less. It's a relational process, and you need to work together with it. It's not this thing that you're doing to somebody, right? But yeah, I mean, you could even look at, say, like shamanic traditions. I mean, that's a long training of you doing your own work, apprenticeship, and that doesn't just happen overnight. It's
always longer than a year for that kind of thing.
God, it's many years,
if not a lifetime.
Right?
Yeah,
a lifetime. Yeah, you're always in the process of learning. Yeah. So yeah, psychedelics today. Why did we get started? Who are we? We have this deep, like depth-oriented, transpersonal, and somatic, and philosophical roots. And I think part of it was also to really kind of elevate these conversations for the psychedelic community and field. And what's our mission here, right? We definitely want to help evolve the field, and also kind of bring in new ways of thinking about stuff. And it's something that we talk about, Joe, is just the creative aspects of this work. There's so many issues that are arising, and you are really kind of on the climate change and sustainability aspect of things. And it's like, spaceship Earth, right? This is probably some of the most important work. And how can holotropic states, extraordinary experiences, help us understand our place in the world? And that's really important. I'm going to bring up a quote. I actually just read it to you guys yesterday on our staff meeting. And I think this is a really kind of good quote that I think kind of wraps up maybe our philosophy and framework a little bit, Joe. I don't know
Let's hear
if you
it.
remember
I can't
it.
Wait. But I don't. I was still pretty sick yesterday, I think. Or I guess that was 2 days ago.
So this is a quote by Stan Groth, I believe, and somebody posted it on Facebook, and it's in some book. I don't know what book it is, so if anybody recognizes this, please let me know. But the quote starts off, "My research started as a search for more effective therapy for depression, phobias of different kinds, asthma, migraine, headaches, and other clinical problems. It was initially an attempt to deepen and accelerate the psychoanalysis and make it more effective. But it turned out it was not possible to draw a clear line between therapy that goes to one core of the problem and the spiritual journey. What began as a therapeutic quest for the roots of emotional and psychosomatic problems has changed spontaneously into a spiritual and philosophical quest. Healing now became a side effect of the mystical quest." And this is something that we bring up, and I think you're just talking about the importance of philosophy. And when I think about my own journey here, I mean, it really boils down to some of these just deeper philosophical existential issues for me. It's like, yes, I started to get on this healing path. I started to get into a lot of this stuff because I wanted to heal. But then it got to these points where I'm like, healing's a side effect. Now I'm just super interested in these more philosophical questions of, what is our purpose here? What is human evolution? Where are we moving towards? How are we showing up? What's our role here as humans on the planet? If this is a spaceship Earth, what are we doing? How can we take care of it? How do we steward it? Thinking about technology too, like, are we integrating with technology? Are we restoring nature? How do we not destroy that? It's what's my purpose here? And we get into like that soul purpose, like, and that was definitely something that came from me after my near-death experience. how am I going to spend my time here on Earth? So a lot of those questions really start to emerge when you start to take this journey. And I think you'll probably start to see it with clients if you are starting to work with psychedelic medicines, whether cap or breath work and whatnot, that these questions start to arise. And I think having some sort of philosophical foundation can be helpful to explore these questions more in depth than just thinking about we need to heal trauma, right? Trauma's
So
part
much
of
I
it. We
could
need
say
to heal
here.
that.
Helps. Certainly helps.
Yeah.
A thing that came up for me was kind of twofold. So I want to do the Alexander the Great story, and then also just kind of a commentary on, what are the downstream impacts of a more a society that includes more psychedelic experiences. Are people, using cannabis or high dose cannabis or psychedelics generally, clinical setting or not, are you going to want to be, if you have the option, like a lot of people don't have the option, in unfulfilling jobs that, might have implications of hurting people or hurting the planet at pretty extreme levels? Like, are you going to want to go back to work at Lockheed and, start developing more missile systems? Like, there's a chance you won't. When I was in my early 20s, fresh out of school, I told a number of people that, I'm cool, like working at most software companies as long as we're not making weapon systems, like whatever, cool. And a number of boomers were very impressed. They're like, oh, it's amazing you have that choice. Like, that's great that you have that conviction. It's like, well, it's kind of obvious. Like I 2001 onward, I had an eye on all this stuff, and I'm like, this doesn't seem like anything I want a part of. Yeah. So, medicine seemed like a more obvious choice for me to kind of be supporting. So I was doing kind of websites for doctors and nurses and various other groups, and it's fun for a while. Anyway, so yeah, are people going to opt out of jobs they don't enjoy or bring them, no fulfillment?
I think it's already starting to happen. I mean, I keep reading these reports.
Totally.
COVID, yeah.
And, what if, and this is a hard one, I don't know what to make of this whole thing, but what does it mean that if you have a kid, you get to, it's awesome that you get to have a child, but then all of a sudden you have to go to work and you miss like the first 5 years of that kid's life. Like, that's rough. That's going to be heartbreaking. And might people choose to lower their needs, lower their requirements, and take a less demanding job? Maybe work 3 days a week instead of 5. I was just with a friend earlier who's only working 3. It's changed her life. So what is that? Are we ready for that? I'm all for it. I think people need to be liberated, but what does that look like for culture at large? Is culture going to be able to adapt? I think so. Like, the stock market might not be happy, but I think we'll do it. And then, more fulfilled, more happy humans. It's amazing. Party planet. Like, Life is a Festival with Eamon Armstrong, like, comes to mind. And this, that's not a, I was getting stuff like that from the Evolver founders years ago. So it's like, let's make the party boat, like, kind of blending that kind of Planet Us Festival with the spaceship Earth concept from Bucky Fuller. And, the best way to fight something isn't necessarily to fight it head on, but create something brand new that's more attractive and people want to come over to it. Perhaps why a lot of these weird revolutions never really stuck, right? And then, okay, back to the Alexander the Great thing. So I forget who this Stoic philosopher was, but he was living in these large clay containers that they used to store wine in long periods of time. He's just like living out in the wilderness, like not even wilderness, like it's ancient Greece. So it's kind of like pretty heavily populated, right? And Alexander the Great rolls up and said, I really like your work. Like, what can I do to help you? He said, move a little bit for me. You're blocking the sun. And it's like, what do we really need? And what do we really want? Like, to your point, what do I want to do with my life while I'm here? These are very big things that can come up in psychedelic sessions and just by doing regular philosophy, right? Like, do you really need to be making 250 plus and killing yourself? Or is it okay if you make 30 or less? and you get to spend time with fulfilling relationships. I think this is like there's going to be a lot of findings from positive psychology over the next few years.
Yeah.
It's seeming like that field is solidifying and becoming more established. So I'm hopeful that positive psychology is going to make some really great contributions for us, like how to live the happiest life, or not. And if people don't know what positive psychology is, I Google it. But really, it's not about sick care. It's about making optimizing for happiness and fulfillment, as opposed to like fixing someone's schizophrenia.
Right.
Very different approaches. And like these are things that are going to come up. The ecological crisis. Like I saw a millennial friend recently post something on Instagram saying, being a millennial is buying small stupid shit that makes you happy while you wait for the world to blow up. And
Jeez.
I'm like, that's horrifying, but it's an accurate reality for some folks. And it sucks, right? Like, what does it mean that we're now at this point in history that's quite dire? And how do we go forward, right? If people survived the Holocaust and made meaning out of their lives, I think we can continue to make meaning here.
Totally.
Yeah. And something in the Groff documentary came up, the recent Way of the Psychonaut. And they were talking about the birth process. Like before we become something new, there has to be a little bit of turbulence and suffering.
Oh, yeah.
Before this new, whatever it is, comes through. Who knows what's coming? But what we're doing right now is not working, and we need to do something different. And, my battle cry years ago was full systems change. And, I still kind of believe that, but I just don't know how practical it is, So we need to do the best we can with what we've got. And, we weren't really dealt a great hand here, but we can still make a big dent and move things forward. And one thing that, we were at a breathwork retreat years ago, and somebody said something like, with so many issues and so many crises going on, like it's so easy to feel helpless and just do nothing. And Lenny's comment was, just pick one. There's so many things you can work on. Just go at it and do one really well and make a difference there. Like,
I think that comes back to like his statement that I kept trying to look for this quote, and I think Lenny finally told us where he heard it. It was at a seminar with Bucky Fuller. I think somebody asked like, "What's our purpose here?" And I think the response was to make small local adjustments. And so I like that sentiment by Stan. Like, it's better to have a big picture than no picture. I think it is important to really dream big and have these big ideas, but also, how could we also be content with making these small local adjustments in our lives? I think that's where some of the change happens. And what if everybody, started to have that sentiment of going, okay, well, I can fix the things around me. Would that actually have ripple effects on a much larger scale? I don't know, right? Like, I just think about, again, like COVID, the lockdowns, all this stuff that's happened, like just thinking about like the small little things that happened over the years, like, and we've chatted about this on the podcast during when this was happening, like, hey, there's more outdoor seating for restaurants. There's like, little towns and cities started to have more like open access. And now that things are starting to open back up, that's closing off. And it's like, what are these small little things that actually brought us maybe joy or happiness that we're like, oh, this is a new way that we could possibly live, or we see a new thing. And now, just rebounding to the old. So it's like, how could we continue making those small local adjustments? I think it's important to think about.
Right. And, I'm considering it here, right? Like I have been minimally involved in the political situation here where I live. I feel a little bad about it, but I've been working on this project, right? Like this is where my energy goes. And the sheriff recently announced a program on reducing overdose deaths. And I saw a lot of less education than I'd like to see in this newspaper article documenting his efforts. And like, do I go meet the sheriff and say, hey, I'm a, drug journalist, educator, pretty up to speed on this stuff. You want to talk? Like, at the same time I do that, am I disclosing that I'm somebody that he wants to arrest? Hope not. But like,
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
scary,
trust
right? It's
police
like a
enough to do it.
vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird catch 22. And, I do I have a relationship with a lawyer now? I think I finally do. Like, so maybe it's okay to go forward and say, hey, like, I do have legal representation, and I'm not going to try to get incriminated here, but, I want to help you do the best thing you can do to serve the county, serve and protect the county.
Yeah.
And there's some really cool stuff in Denver going on that I should probably get involved with. Like, I'm told there's some stuff around trying to mimic the Oregon measure in
Oh, cool.
Denver. I think that would be really nice. Um, we're above carrying capacity. Like, ecological carrying capacity is like maxed out in Colorado, so it's a little problematic seeing something that might bring more people here, but I think it is helpful, and I think it would be a short-lived thing in terms of spotlight. Yeah. So there's a lot going on, and so let's get into this capitalism and in medical model stuff, Kyle, before we run out of time. But we critique it, right? But we're also fans of it. It's okay to critique Picasso. It's okay to critique Trey Anastasio or Mozart. Sorry for putting them together, people. But it's good to be able to critique, and it's helpful. Like, Socrates was the gadfly, like the fly on the horse's ass of Athens. And, it was because he wanted ancient Athens to live up to its potential. And I think that's what we're doing. We want the whole movement to live up to its potential. Individual companies included, right? Like, I would love a controversial example. Like, I would love for Compass to, kind of turn a tune a little bit and become a really healthy player in the space, and treat this thing like the concept it is. This is, I hate to say it, everybody, going to be a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and people are coming in knowing that. And this is why you're seeing behaviors that you don't like, is because of that. What have any of us done to impact Compass by calling them out? Hopefully it's made them change their tune internally, but I've not seen any statements on this. So, getting close to those people and helping steward those people in a good, positive, productive direction by being friends with them, giving them great information, all this other stuff, that can be really helpful, and might really be the way forward. Collaboration. Like, if you make somebody your enemy, you give them more power. Like,
well, you had some really interesting conversations, I feel like, about some of this stuff on the SciTech Summit, and like kind of talking to Rick about this and kind of tossing these ideas out, right? Because you kind of even tossed out like him bringing money from like the Mercer family, and it's like that was super controversial, right? But
only $1 million out of 150 million total they've collected in lifetime donations. And, why was it so controversial? It was $1 million.
Well, because of who they are, right?
I guess. But, they're trying to help. Well, on the surface, they're trying to help soldiers recover quicker and get back to their lives. Military veterans are really hurt up and underserved. And, they value the military and therefore want to help those people. Do you value the military? Like, these are questions individuals have to ask themselves. I have plenty of critiques of U.S. foreign policy. I have plenty of critiques of, what we've done in the last 30 years. But I don't want to let soldiers just suffer, especially veterans when they come home and they have children. Like, that's just transmitting intergenerational trauma. These soldiers can't have a happy life because they're so like hurt. And we have the technology. Like, why wouldn't we? because we want them to suffer because they were at war, like they were convinced at age 17, 18, 19, 20, whatever, to join the military and go serve, and then they got hurt. Like cerebellum's not fully developed at that point. Like your personality is not fully formed at that point, and you're jumping into something like most humans, I think, deserve to have a good life, and we should do everything we can to help those we can help. As a culture, not as individuals, right? Like we as individuals have different obligations than the culture does. So it's a really hard balancing act, man.
It really
and it's
is
a transmutation, right? Like you were saying, like the mystical experience becomes the healing modality or something like that earlier. And it made me think of alchemy and alchemical transmutation, turning a base thing into a more sublime or more divine thing. And a happy human, pretty incredible thing. A happy and connected, well integrated human. Integration, sorry. We need to do some work on that word. But, like there's a lot here. And we've got a long way to go. And we need everybody.
Yeah, we do. And, I know it's a very kind of complex and nuanced topic to get into. But, that's what we've been trying to do here at times, right? Like try to see all these different sides and try to find some sort of balance. It's like, as much as I hate, the huge kind of capitalistic greed that we see every day and just around the culture that we live in, and it just feels like it sucks and extracts everything out of places and people. Doesn't feel good, right? There's the other part of it that we live in it, and unfortunately we all kind of have to live in it. And this is something that like I've struggled with, like after having, I'm sure most of you listening that had really powerful psychedelic experiences, like when you have that experience where you just get so outside of just all these cultural norms that we set up, it makes me scratch my head and go, what the hell are we doing here? Why can't we see a new way forward? And that's what I've really struggled with after my near-death experience, of just coming back here and just seeing how absurd all the systems are. But as much as absurd as it is, I could sit there and be like, try to remove myself from culture at large, go run off in the woods. It's always what I've wanted to do, be a hermit, like not have any interactions and, grow my own food, But there's also this part of like, I'm part of culture. We all are. And how do we show up and, try to make a change somehow? And sometimes that includes, maybe, playing the game a little bit, right? Like needing to do the things like, thinking about building this business. Like I never thought I would be in this position, and like building a business is interesting. This didn't start off, I mean, we probably talked about it a little bit, but this started off as a passion project. I mean, we started this just out of the love of the content and topics. And, it's not like we started off now where people are seeing the gold rush and they're seeing opportunity here and saying, oh, like this is the future. I mean, we were saying, this is really interesting, and we just want to facilitate conversations because this is so part of our life. But now being kind of sucked into more of, okay, well, we're spending more time doing this. It's starting to take up majority of our time. Well, I can't, pay the bills if this isn't starting to become a functional business. And it's this balance between, okay, I want to do something I love here, but we also need to make it work, right? Because if we're not making it work, we're not taking care of ourselves, and we're ultimately, that becomes the downside when you're not taking care of yourself and getting those needs met. And so that's also been a challenge on my end, right? It's like, how the hell do we build an ethical, responsible, sustainable business when, I think in the psychedelic ethos, like capitalism is this like dirty word, but also it's the world that we live in. And, can we create new models? I think so. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of work. And I would love to see more of a cooperative type of approach to business, right? Kind of like that. I know people in the community talk about like this mycelium network and how do we feed each other and spread nutrients throughout. And I think that would be a great way forward instead of just wanting to dominate one space and extract everything. Like, yeah, how do we work together? How can we see the benefits of what other companies are doing, even though we might not agree with it at times, right? So like Compass, for example, it's like, hey, if we hate them and we think they are kind of, they have some bad things, they're also hopefully bringing this research. They have the money to do this research. Is that, does that outweigh the bad that we believe in, and maybe their ethos and how they view things? What's the outcome of bringing psilocybin to market for a lot of people, right? And being
At
able to
scale.
afford at scale, isn't that like the wish for most of us in here in this, world? It's like, oh, psilocybin psychedelics will heal. But now that we're talking about scalability, well, scalability comes with a lot of money and capital and systems and procedures, and it's a weird thing, right? It's like, how do we find balance and see both sides, and try to work together eventually? It's hard, right? Because I feel like culturally we do this divide thing. It's, you're on this side, you're on that side, you're on this side, you're on that side, and it's like, I don't know, is that helpful all the time? I feel like we're just constantly in division wars culturally. It's like, and I don't know, it makes your head spin, or at least I feel that way.
I think this is the reason we don't necessarily like to call it a psychedelic community.
Right.
It's too fractured to really be a community. And people don't want to hear what the others have to say. Like, if we just look at, how many beefs are active in the space, like there's so many right now. Major divides between major organizations. I like to understand all sides of them, so I try to study it when I can. But when you see consistent bad behavior, at what point do you just walk away from those people?
Right.
Like, you trying to reform another group takes you away from doing your own inner work, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and at what point do you decide somebody else's organization is part of your work? It's a really complicated topic, and I don't have a clear answer for anybody other than this is complicated. We like to highlight complexity, novelty, and perhaps our thesis is confused because of that. Like,
right, we're not taking a clear stance.
Complexity is like complexity is the dominating thing. It's a Terrence McKenna quote I posted last night. Best thing we can tell is we're trapped in some sort of strange art. I love that, and there's some truth there. There's definitely truth there. The truth, and probably not, but it's certainly helpful to understand that. And McKenna is so helpful because of these one-liners he throws out once in a while, and they're not all his, right? Like, this one is really valuable. Like, not only is reality stranger than we believe, but it's stranger than we can believe. That's a paraphrase of an older sci-fi writer, and it's really helpful to know this stuff and like study a particular science far enough, and you'll see that the science ends at a certain point.
Right.
I think particle physics, when quantum stuff came around, it's like, you're telling me what? And then we had this whole, the Kuhn book, this something around paradigm shifts and this like progression through different scientific revolutions. And at a certain point, people resist it like crazy, call you maniac. They resist it the hardest right before they buy in. We're, I think, right at that breaking point with psychedelics culturally. Like, we just have a little bit further to go, and we're in a totally different planet as far as psychedelics go. I hope we're also in a different planet around ecology and drug policy at large as well in the near future. So, it doesn't make sense. All of this stuff doesn't make sense. We're paying tax dollars to incarcerate people for not hurting other people, victimless crimes, allegedly, when we could be spending those dollars to help us survive the next 50 years better, by spending on climate projects. Why is it better to lock families up for generations than to save countless lives in the future and preserve biodiversity on the planet. Yeah. These talk tracks, Paul Stamets could probably make an impact if he wanted to include some of these things into his kind of like normal talking points around biodiversity and old growth and all this stuff. But, his talk track's still good and it sells. And he's convinced a lot of people. Like, I think one of the best things he did was identify that the colony collapse disorder, like all the bees going away, was the number one bipartisan issue on the planet, and working on that.
Yeah.
Say, hey, mushrooms can help with this. And that opens the conversation. What else can mushrooms do?
Right.
Yeah. It's, I love Paul. Thank you, Paul, for your work.
We need to get him on the show, hopefully, at some point.
Yeah, totally.
One day.
And he's going to be at Telluride next weekend at the Mushroom Fest. I'm hanging out with my little brother instead of going to see Paul. He's coming out to visit, so that'll be cool.
Priorities. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Sorry, Paul, about that one.
But yeah, this stuff is complex. And I think, just hanging out in the complexity, learning how to navigate it, teasing apart, viewing all the nuances is important. Like really kind of breaking down all the different sides, trying to find out what's there.
What can we know through scientific method? What can't we know through scientific method? What is an empirical question? What isn't? Who are people addressing this complexity in the scientific field? There's some, but it's hard. I'm reminded of Greg Kaiser's book. What the hell was it called? Dear Machine.
Yeah, Dear Machine. Yeah.
Yeah, a letter to the coming super AI sales, maybe he was calling it. Yeah, it's like no individual mind is going to be able to track this level of complexity. It's going to take a super intelligent AI. Perhaps that's coming. Musk has been yelling about it for ages. But hopefully Greg Kaiser's book helps. And psychedelics can help us get there and help us communicate and understand it, I think.
Just thinking about like a little thought around like small local adjustments, coming back to that, and just thinking about like capitalism and Compass. For example, like Oregon, right? Like Compass started to throw opposition against that initiative. And it's like, if we all kind of started to I guess like, this big kind of corporate structure, it feels like bad or evil, and it feels extractive, and there's so much money wrapped up in there. Like how do we create these new systems, right? Like I feel like what Oregon and some of these other initiatives are doing are also kind of taking some power away from those companies. But again, are we able to pass initiatives like that? What happens if the FDA finally gets involved and they say, hey, like what are you guys doing? You need to get this FDA approved. And then, okay, now we need a bunch of money again. So, I don't know. It's just more thoughts, more questions, not a lot of answers here.
Complexity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, start with what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? What are some ways of getting there? And what's the way that matches best with who you are to get there? And everybody's going to have a different approach. We've all got different lived experiences and different cultures. There's, no reason why an urbanite from London is going to have similar views to somebody, living 50 miles outside Portland. Like there's a lot of geography to cover, a lot of people to help. And there's no end to the people that are going to need to be served. Right. Yeah.
Well, that makes me even think just eco-wise of different environments, different rules, different guidelines. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that's our one issue at times, is just trying to make these general rules over everything, when the Northeast is so different than the Southwest, and there's different rules that apply. And why are we trying to make everything one rule, saying this is how it's governed? It's no, those rules don't apply in that ecosystem. You need different systems in place. And it's, I think, again, taking these small local adjustments, small local approaches can be helpful, instead of just trying to do everything mono, one thing. It's Dude, yeah, there's a lot of different systems at play here in the world, and we need the complexity. We need the diversity. We need all sorts of models out here.
I was chatting with my sister the other day, and she said, she asked me if I watched The Mandalorian. I said, yeah. And there was this guy who, Gustavo Fring from Breaking Bad. He plays like a character in the Empire in Mandalorian, and he said, why do we want the Empire back? All metrics improve under the Empire. So, but if there's one thing we know right now, it's that monocultures aren't good. They're a forced abstraction, that have negative consequences downstream. It's abstracting nature from, natural cycles. And yeah, bioregionalism, kind of what you were getting at earlier, Northeast versus Southwest, very different. Like there's no water in the Southwest. There's plenty of water in the Northeast. Like it's kind of shocking that Vermont has anything to do with New Mexico or Arizona, right?
Right. Yeah. Totally different cultures, right?
Yeah. Both places are wildly beautiful, but very different scenes. I've been spending a lot of time in Arizona. It's crazy. I kind of like Arizona, but it is nuts. And that's me coming from New Hampshire and observing what those people are doing and how they're deciding to run their government, decisions around water security. Apparently, no one gives a shit down there. It's not true, but it's a dire situation. The water security in Arizona. How are people not thinking about it? Would psychedelics make them think about, hey, we got like a single tube coming from California over here. Like, should we build the city bigger? What's going to happen when the water runs out? I don't know. Scary stuff. And, we're living through a lot of climate uncertainty right now. Like, I've never seen so much smoke. Like, I can barely go outside in Colorado right now.
Jeez.
I've, like pretty bad situations with my lungs just going outside. What does that do to kids? What does that do to, everything really? There's a lot in play, and it's overwhelming. I guess my primary suggestion right now, take care of yourself and slow down. Don't try to understand all of it. Just understand that there is complexity almost everywhere, and almost a level of uncertainty that's going to make you go crazy if you sit with it for too long. And then calm down and figure out, like, where do you want to sit in this storm? And how do you want to play a role through this storm? Yeah. And, what is existence other than chaos? Like, with a little bit of rhyming with the past, it's
I like
fucking
that.
Crazy out there, people. Yeah. And, chaos is helpful. Entropy and negentropy. Did you ever hear of negentropy, by the way?
I don't think so, no.
It's just the inverse of entropy. Entropy is like order collapsing, right? Like the universe falling apart into heat death, versus what are things that build, negentropy and order again.
Right.
Yeah, this is an argument from my TM philosophy teacher. It's like TM, like doing meditation and various spiritual practices, builds up negentropy in the world. And humans have a lot of agency around negentropy and like fighting that heat death, and fighting like, just chaos. Like chaos, like comes in when entropy increases. It seems like there's emergent properties at a certain point, and that can look like chaos. Chaos abounds everywhere too, right? So,
yeah,
and for clinicians listening, these are things that psychedelic users want to talk about. So your therapy clients, your coaching clients might really want to talk about this stuff. So get ready. Or, I don't know, on the inverse, maybe they're in, more conservative scene and want to talk about how family values are collapsing. Like they're Jordan Peterson fans and they don't want to necessarily talk about like novel ways of being. They want to talk about tradition and things that endanger traditional values. Got some things to say about that, but those concerns are real. Those are valid concerns from that person's lived experience. And, it's great that you just got done listening to NPR, but can you have compassion for somebody who's on your couch, like needing help?
Mm.
Yeah. That's probably enough.
Yeah, we're over an hour.
Yeah.
But hopefully this is helpful for people, just to kind of, I know we kind of went all over the board, and some of our intention was to, just kind of like, revisit who we are, some of our ideals over here and whatnot, especially for some of those new listeners that are starting to tune into the podcast. So yeah, thanks for listening and checking out. And yeah, hopefully some of this was helpful to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
We didn't get into astrology yet, but that's another topic.
Thankfully, I haven't spent any time on astrology lately. I would love to, but nothing to say there other than read some Plato, read some Aristotle.
But maybe we should address that quickly. Like if you
go for it.
Because we have, we have started somewhat of a series on our YouTube, and we had made some posts in the past and have had astrologers on. And we had some critique and pushback from especially people in the scientific community of like, why would you host this? Why are you having these conversations? This is detrimental to the psychedelic research community. And, it's really interesting. Sure. We were exploring the Groff Legacy training with Ren Butler. And on there, they're actually including archetypal astrology into the program, and a quote by Stan saying astrology is the Rosetta Stone. And
Rosetta Stone for understanding the psychedelic experience and the psyche,
and the psyche. So, like, people are always asking, why are you having these conversations? Again, like from our tradition with Stan, Stan and Rick Tarnas did some classes together, and I think Stan was even skeptical of some of that work, and slowly started to really be open-minded about it, like seeing some of these archetypal themes emerge, and how does that relate to the psyche? How does it help us understand the psyche? So again, coming back to language of the psyche, more of this depth-oriented work, like how are we communicating with psyche and soul? And that might be a really great communication tool for some people. You see archetypal themes emerge, and I don't really like to view it as so predictive of this is going to happen, this and that. There's so many different schools, so many different approaches. I typically like that archetypal approach in the tradition of like, Rick Tarnas, and then what Stan has offered there as well. And like what Ren Butler is doing, and Jessica DeRuzza, and all the others that really kind of came out of that lineage. But that lineage, that's also where some of our values are rooted at, is in with Stan's work. A lot of the stuff, CIIS, right? Like that program over there has a lot of like our values, transpersonal, that Groffian psychedelic lineage. So yeah, I just wanted to address that because it's like, who are we, and why do we have certain projects, certain things that emerge? The transpersonal is so deeply rooted in our lineage, and bringing some of those conversations in is important, even though it is taboo, it's on the edges. How do we also be open-minded about it? How can we maybe view it in a different lens that you might not have thought about before? So yeah, just a little caveat there.
I was watching Veep last night, and like the number cruncher guy, Kent, I think, said something. Have you tried telling them that there's no scientific evidence to show that God exists? And that's his way of pushing back on like evangelicals. Like, what on earth? And I wonder if there's some sort of relation here to like how scientists might look at the world, in general. Like the world has no magic. The world is predictable and understandable. Like Francis Bacon saying things along the lines of, we need to torture nature so that she reveals her secrets to us. Wow. Like showing that experimental science is the way forward, and, be ruthless with it. And it's really interesting. So yeah, we could go on for hours here, but I think there's some creative limitations. Maybe before you throw it all out, read a couple books to see if you want to check it out. Cool. I don't care if you're not that interested. That's fine.
Totally.
We're going to put out plenty of content that's still interesting for you. even if you don't give a shit about transpersonal stuff, like we're still going to be putting out content that's helpful for you. And hopefully is a net benefit to this new psychedelic culture, not community. Yeah. So, all right. I think that's enough. And yeah, please hit us up with questions. We want more fodder for these podcasts. And if there's something you'd like, so we're trying to revision what we're doing on these Friday episodes. So if you have some ideas, send them on over, support@psychedelicstoday.com, or hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, whatever. And we'll be looking forward to, hearing your feedback. We would love feedback on anything we said here. So feel free to hit us up on that. And reminder, September 23, Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. We've sold maybe a quarter of the seats so far. We're hoping to sell them all. So we would love for you to join us. If you're trying to orient in the space, we can help you. And it's okay if you don't agree with us. We're happy to have disagreeers out there, and we love having those conversations. So again, September 23, the 8-week program kicks off. Learn more at psychedelicstoday.com or psychedeliceducationcenter.com. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Joe and Kyle signing off. We'll see you next time.
Take care. Thank you.